Hello and welcome back to the Virtual Classroom U.S. History Edition. I'm your host, Dr. Olmsted. Today's topic, we continue our discussion of the 2000s from Barack Obama to the present day. Now, before we begin, as always, take a moment, hit pause on your video, jot down the rest of the lecture outline, and pay particular attention to those key terms. Now that we got that, then let's get started. So we left off with the Great Recession under George W. Bush. And again, this is not solely his fault. This has been years of deregulation, largely under the Clinton administration. But nonetheless, things were dire, as you can see by this chart right here. And in 2008, Bush's tenure is up. He served his 2 terms. We will have a new president. And the focal point, the presumptive nominee for Democratic Party was, of course, Hillary Clinton. Unfortunately, Clinton had a major albatross around her neck, and that was the fact as senator, she had voted to enter Iraq as part of the Iraq War, which proved, of course, to be kind of like people compared it to Bush's Vietnam. And so this was seen as an albatross around her neck, and so she started strong initially, but is quickly overcome by an upstart candidate by the name of Barack Obama. And Barack Obama, this young senator from Illinois, at 47 years old, he kind of exuded that energy of a Kennedy-esque idea. He also reflected the changing of America, the changing demographics. He was born to an interracial couple, a Kenyan immigrant, and a white woman. He also emphasized that outsider status. Remember, he had just been elected his first term as senator. He also realized that American people were hungry for change, and his motto, change we can believe in. Yes, we can. He also harnessed something else, and that was social media. He put a clinic on how to use social media to reach young people, using Twitter, using other social media avenues as a way to reach people in a very positive, uplifting way. Now, in the general election, and by the way, first of all, note that you need to know about is he will be, of course, the first African-American candidate for any major political party. And of course, ultimately, he will become the first African-American president, which, ironically enough, if you're taking the STAR test for state of Texas, literally the only thing about Barack Obama you have to know is that he was the first black president, as sad as that is. But of course, this is a AP dual credit class, and therefore you're expected to know far more than just that. Now, in the general election, he will face off against John McCain, who was a Vietnam War vet, war hero, had spent 4 years in a POW camp, senator from, of course, Arizona. And to counter the idea of a ethnic minority being, Barack Obama, he will, of course, choose Sarah Palin as his running mate reluctantly. Basically, he's forced to by the Republican Party. And despite being governor of Alaska, she will be a disaster. Because when it came to foreign policy questions, she was in way over her head, unfortunately. As she once famously quipped, she can look out her back door of her house and see Russia. No, she can't. Nonetheless, in the popular election, Obama won 53% of the popular vote. He sweeps Electoral College. And sure enough, he will become the first African-American president. On election night, Obama promised a new era of bipartisan cooperation. Otherwise, sober and rational people actually talked about a post-racial, post-partisan America. Yeah, no, didn't happen. Still aren't there. In fact, I think we're further away than ever before. Now, Obama's first mission as president is to stop the Great Recession. Remember, we are sliding further and further to the point where we're going to enter into a Great Depression again. And so in 2009, he pushes through an $800 billion stimulus plan, known as the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the ARRA. Now remember, this is the second stimulus act. Remember, Bush had that $700 billion one that failed miserably. because it had no oversight, no stipulations given to corporations to do with what they will. This one, however, provided oversight. Now, I will tell you first and foremost, this was not a complete bill. In fact, most economists argue that it did not go far enough. It was nowhere near enough. This was just enough of an economic stimulus to pushing us over the economic ledge into the oblivion. This was not enough to actually jumpstart our economy. But it represents the fact that Obama is still largely a new Democrat. He's not comfortable with this huge, massive bailout. But what it did do well was it stopped us going over the edge, and he put stipulations and oversight to make sure that corporations did not just give themselves big bonuses. The second thing he did is address the auto industry, because in the United States there's the big three. There's the General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler. And both Chrysler and General Motors were on the verge of bankruptcy. And again, they were deemed, to use Bush's terms, too big to fail. And Obama invited all three leaders of the White House and offered the auto bailout. Now, unfortunately, this, while it was important, it did work. It saved General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler. Even though Ford was not bankrupt yet, it was getting pretty bad. The problem is, and while it did save the big three automakers, which is good, Obama also followed somewhat in the steps of Reagan, as he severely hurt the unions. In this case, the UAW, the United Auto Workers Union for the big three automakers. Because in allowing General Motors, Ford, Chrysler to take this auto bailout federal money, it included many stipulations, including that the UAW would be forced to rework their contract, their union negotiated contract, which included a reduction in their private insurance. It also included what was called Tier 2 pricing. In other words, any new hire to any of the big three would actually make less money per hour than someone who had been hired previously. So, which again severely damages the union, akin to what Reagan did with the air traffic controllers. It's damaging the average working class, middle class worker. But both these things were necessary. And again, I think he went about the wrong way as far as hurting the unions. Maybe he didn't go far enough with the overall the ARRA. But nonetheless, it does stem the tide. And Obama turns to focus on something that had been a Democratic dream since 1946. And that is healthcare. Healthcare reform. And again, this was very much needed. Now, you can argue whether or not you like Obamacare, whether it is constitutional. That's all. We'll talk about that in a minute. There is no doubt, though, healthcare reform was drastically and desperately needed. Premiums were through the roof for very little coverage for the average American, unless you're a member of a union or the federal government. Now, this is a far cry from the universal health care that Democrats so longed for. This is not Medicare for all. This is not universal health care. Obamacare, aka the Affordable Care Act, is the official name for it. And the way it was implemented was a little shady. Very famously, see right behind Barack Obama in the picture is Nancy Pelosi, the current Speaker of the House. She very famously said, yep, here's this huge, huge bill that's more than 1,000 pages long. If you want to read it, you need to pass it first. Wait, yeah, she actually said that. If you want to know what's in this bill, you got to pass it first, then we can read it. That's not how democracy works. You read the bill, you negotiate it, you make adjustments, then you vote and pass the bill. But nonetheless, and then of course also very shady is the way it's passed. It is done by some shady back dealing, because part of the provisions there would provide for birth control and abortions. And that upset some of these pro-life Democrats, including one from Michigan, who's on his way out. And basically, Obama promised an amendment to the bill after it was passed in exchange for his vote, in that group's vote. And in the end, to his credit, Obama did change it to allow religious exemptions and to allow for pro-life Democrats to get their way in this case. He also severely hurt the small businesses. In fact, I mentioned before, I owned a tanning salon. Originally, part of the way to pay for Obamacare was through what was called the 5% Bow tax. It was going to be a 5% tax on cosmetic surgeries. So, Botox, called the Bow tax. And this was in the news for about a month. Unfortunately, of course, who this taxes, of course, is generally speaking rich white people. Number one demographic to get, cosmetic surgery, especially things like Botox. Instead, the last minute, the week before Christmas, 2010, it was changed out and replaced not a 5% tax on cosmetic surgeries, but rather a 10% tax on indoor tanning, which largely taxed middle and lower class people. Because rich people go on vacation. Yeah, rich people tan too, but the number one demographic of tanning and indoor tanning salons, of course, is middle and lower middle class white people. Again, this is considered almost a betrayal for liberals as hurting the middle class. Nonetheless, though, it will pass, and it does provide some means of lowering premiums in the short term. In the long term, premiums are going to be jacked up once again to the present day. But for the short term, it does provide that every American must have health insurance or face a penalty. And those who can't afford it will get government subsidies to help them afford it. Now, the reason this is legal, and it was challenged in court, of course, was that the penalty was assessed to your income tax. And therefore, Supreme Court rules, since the federal government has the right to tax you, Obamacare is legal. And thus, it was considered constitutional. Now, more importantly, this was important for many Americans to achieve health care. It also allowed for Americans to get health care even if they had pre-existing conditions, which was a huge boom for many Americans who had issues getting health insurance in the past. He also had to fix Wall Street. Again, this deregulation had caused the housing crash. And so in 2010, also, he will sign the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act, which will be the most far-reaching Wall Street regulation bill since the New Deal. And basically, there's something called shadowy derivative markets that have been kind of done in the shadows and were considered very risky ventures. These were now subject to public oversight. They also limited speculative investments and basically reined in Wall Street and shady, extravagant loan operations that were deemed too risky. Again, they're playing games with the American people's money. This was deemed too risky. And again, this law is a major departure from the free market economic philosophy that had been championed by Reagan, H.W., Clinton, and W. So again, there's some movement to the left here with Obama. Now, still though, note, Obama is still a new Democrat. In most of his first 2 years, while it was the most dramatic reform since the 60s of the Great Society, ultimately, Obamacare, the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Act, they're still very centrist when it comes to, if you think back to the liberal consensus ideas, they're still very centrist when compared to LBJ, Truman, and so forth. But nonetheless, these were decried as socialist. These were decried as far left radical by the conservatives, by the Republicans. And in 2010, there was a huge conservative backlash, once again, just like we saw under Clinton, despite the fact these were largely centrist policies. And they formed it in response to what they considered a very liberal Obamacare, which it wasn't. And in 2010, a new group of Republicans called the Tea Party began to push their way, and they would make tremendous inroads in the 2010 midterm election. And you see the sign, ram it down our throat in 2009, we'll shove it up your butt in 2010. In other words, Obamacare was shoved down their throat, and now they're going to stick it to the Democrats. And they did so through some very questionable tactics. And basically this group said it's all or nothing, it's our way or the highway. They will obstruct as much as possible to prevent Obama from being able to implement any of his policies. And as a result, they will take back the House of Representatives, thus delaying anything for Obama to actually legislate and do. They even went so far as to question the legitimacy of the president, of Barack Obama. And what they did is they questioned whether or not he was truly a U.S. citizen or not, which, by the way, is a requirement to be U.S. president. Not only a U.S. citizen, but you have to be born in the United States. And there was some debate that was known as the birther movement that questioned whether or not Barack Obama was truly born in the United States as his birth certificate said. And members of the Tea Party and other more radical right-wingers began to question whether or not he was really a tried and true born in the United States U.S. citizen, thus eligible for the presidency. And there were some Tea Party people and other conservatives who really began to say, no, I got proof. One of which is right here. He says he has an extremely credible source that has called my office and told me that Barack Obama's birth certificate is a fraud. Now, I never fully understood at the time why this was considered a racist attack. Until this past year, in 2019, one of the early leaders for the Democrat nominee for the 2020 election was Kamala Harris. In the very first Democratic debate, she blew it out of the water, was phenomenal, got a huge boost, became the front runner initially. The next day, Donald Trump Jr., and it might have been Eric Trump, I couldn't get the runners, either Eric Trump or Donald Trump Jr., retweeted someone who questioned Kamala Harris's legitimacy to be president based on that she was not really born in the United States, but rather in the Caribbean. And it struck me, again, she's born in the United States, but it struck me as they haven't done this to any white person. They only did it to the African Americans. They're trying to essentially stir up dissension. And you can think it's racist or you cannot think it's racist. That's up to you. But they don't question anyone else's legitimacy except the African American. Nonetheless, whether the birther movement aside, in the 2010 midterms, Republicans will sweep into the House, while Democrats will narrowly hold the Senate. At the state level, Republicans will sweep into power and they'll begin to pass numerous pieces of legislation that are much more conservative in nature, reflecting how far we move to the right as American politics. And for Barack Obama, this is bad because it makes it very difficult to pass any legislation. And then things get worse for Obama. On foreign affairs, he had campaigned to end the war in Iraq. And in 2011, the last American soldier came home. The ultimate cost of the war was $2 trillion, 5,000 American soldiers, and hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians dead. And unfortunately, installing democracy in Iraq had proved largely the creation of an unstable, weak government, creating a power vacuum for others to fill. Remember we talked about George H.W. Bush in the Persian Gulf War? He's afraid to take out Saddam Hussein because, as bad as he was as a tyrant, he held the region in check. What would happen in the power vacuum if he's removed? Well, Bush took him out, Obama finds out what replaces him, and that, of course, is ISIS. And the Islamic State rises up and will be a force to be dealt with, this new reign of terror in the region. Now, at the same time, Obama begins some questionable tactics of his own. Remember, Bush had enhanced interrogation. Under Obama, we have the use of drone warfare. Is it ethical to use a drone, unmanned machine, to fly in, remote control from elsewhere, to take out civilian targets or military targets, take out human beings? And you see the legality. Is it really legal? Because are you catching the person in the act? Do they not deserve due process? And it becomes a very questionable gray area. I love this cartoon. So, nonetheless, the Iraq war ends. He kept his promise, but instead of pulling the troops back home, He instead changes course and he moves the troops back to Afghanistan. Because where he believes that Iraq is the wrong war, which many believed, he believed that Afghanistan was the right war. And in a way, you could say Afghanistan became Obama's Iraq that Bush had. And as it drew on and on and on, it drew Vietnam comparisons once again. And in the meantime, he would continue many controversial policies of George W. Bush, including extension of the Patriot Act. He would keep Guantanamo Bay, Cuba open for enhanced interrogation and imprisoning suspected terrorists. However, in 2011, he will do something that the world will cheer, Republicans, Democrats alike. He will issue the command to take out Osama bin Laden. And finally, at last, the culprit of 9/11 will be killed 10 years after the fact. Unfortunately, not only does he take out Obama, or does not only take out bin Laden, he also, again, goes into Afghanistan. He will also go into Libya. He will also go into Egypt. And he continued this idea of being this global peacekeeper. In other words, he continues the expansion of intervention into other countries. Again, continuing what Bush did, continuing what Clinton did. And again, it's questioning, is this the moral, ethical thing for us to do? But you can see at our foreign policy, securing democracy abroad is still at the heart of our foreign policy. Now, in 2012, despite a continued economic slump, we're still in the Great Recession. Despite dissatisfaction with the war in Afghanistan and a sagging approval rating, Obama will win re-election against the Republican candidate Mitt Romney. And quite honestly, Mitt Romney was a very bad candidate to put forth because Mitt Romney, when he was governor of Massachusetts, had helped create a statewide healthcare system that was dubbed Romneycare. And essentially, that became the initial prototype for Obamacare. And yet he campaigned in the election against Obama, saying, no, I don't really support universal I don't support Obamacare. I'll repeal it. How do you say that if you were the one who helped create Obamacare and sign that into law? Of course, his argument was, well, that was a state thing, not a national thing. But nonetheless, he was a very weak candidate that was ultimately failed. But Obama's second term, Republicans picked up more seats in the House, and he faced an extremely hostile Congress. Thus, Obama's second term is largely marked by executive action rather than legislation through, Congress. For one issue, is almost immediately he will provide executive action known as DACA, Deferred Action Against Undocumented Immigrants, in which case, if you were under 30 years old and had good standing, as in you were not charged with a crime other than obviously being undocumented, you could apply for status. Now, not citizenship, but legal status to avoid deportation. Again, this was done through executive action because Congress refused to act, despite some push for a bipartisan immigration reform. In the end, this will allow millions of undocumented immigrants the opportunity to achieve some status, though never citizenship. This is still in effect to the present day, though Donald Trump has been trying to get rid of it and the program, which is very scary because all those names are on a list somewhere in the federal government now. He will also deal with gay rights. During his second term, there'll be some major civil rights issues that will play out, including LGBTQ rights. In 2010, he will repeal the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy of Bill Clinton, and it will allow gays and lesbians to openly serve in the military. Again, major victory for the LGBTQ community. In 2013, the Supreme Court will overturn the Defense of Marriage Act signed by Bill Clinton. They will say it's unconstitutional in the case Windsor versus United States. And thus, the Defense of Marriage Act, one man, one woman, will be overturned as unconstitutional. And of course, the big one in June of 2015, Obergefell versus Hodges, the Supreme Court will overturn all bans on gay marriage, thus allowing gay marriage to be the law of the land, allowing homosexual individuals to get married no matter what state they live in, and that will be recognized in any other state they may live in as well. Again, the pinnacle for gay rights at this point. Unfortunately, despite these major victories for the gay community, that idea of a post-racial society, yeah, not so much. Despite the symbolism of the first black president, despite the fact the LGBT community did fare a bit better, other racial minorities will not fare very well. In 2013, there was the Shelby County versus Holder court case. And this court case is actually very big, even though most students do not really know what's going on here. In this court case, it guts the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Now, if you remember correctly, we talked about this before. In the 1965 Voting Rights Act, not only did it outlaw any impediment to voting, like literacy tests, voter IDs, it also mandated that any state with a history of racism, i.e. the South, would have to get government approval if they wanted to change their voting districts. Again, this was done so that states themselves could not what's called gerrymander their voting districts, which would essentially disallow or overturn the power of minority groups. So, for example, if you have a region, a circle of people that largely vote Democratic, and Republicans don't like that, now, without any government approval after Shelby County versus Holder, these states could gerrymander these districts wherein you take all the suburbs that are mostly white and vote Republican and just incorporate a slice of that pie. So rather than having one district in the center, have that district cut into 8 separate little pie slices that attach to a larger white section outside of it. This now nullifies their voting rights. Now they can still vote, but their vote's not going to matter as much because they're not going to get a representative that matches them. Instead, they're going to get a representative that matches the suburb outside of them. And while it's not fully in effect yet, you can see the transition coming through the years of this gerrymandering these districts. We will also have increased police violence during this period. As Michael Brown is gunned down by Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri, we will see the rise of Black Lives Matter. As many people begin pushing for, again, this increased issue of over-policing of predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods. And again, you've seen this in Florida. We saw it in New York with the, Can't Breathe. You saw it, obviously, in Ferguson, Missouri. This has been a large racial backlash during the Obama administration. They've been building since the 90s, but has been spilling over during the 2010s. And, of course, you see African Americans push back, trying to protest this, and, of course, being met with extreme hostility in their protesting, which, again, is protected by the First Amendment rights. All of this, of course, leads us to the 2016 election. Obama is out. He served his 2 terms. And in the 2016 election, we have 2 candidates. We have Hillary Clinton against Donald Trump, the political outsider, the businessman. When the election results come in, Hillary Clinton won by more than 2 million votes in the popular vote. The biggest gap between the popular vote and the electoral vote since Rutherford B. Hayes became president in the Compromise of 1877, which, remember, that was shady. Basically in exchange for pulling troops out of the South, Republican can become president. The big question in everyone's mind is, how in the world does this happen? How does a candidate win by 2 million votes in the popular vote and lose? Now, guys, first of all, how were so many people wrong about this election? No one gave Donald Trump a chance. Again, love him or hate him, that's irrelevant right now. We're discussing history of it. His victory, however, did not come out of nowhere. It is the product of historical forces that have been years and even decades in the making. Now, as a student of history, we've discussed all year, you should know there's never just one reason a historical event happens. Nothing is monocausal. And I think there's a few different conclusions we can draw with the 2016 election. First, this is very much about 21st century populism. This is a rejection of the elites on both sides. Because for both sides, Republican, Democrat alike, these party establishment elites, these leaders who have been there for years, were seen as having political corruption. Both sides were being guilty of gutting American manufacturing. Remember, it was, yes, a Republican who negotiated NAFTA. It was a Democrat who signed it. It was the Democrat Hillary Clinton who signed on to go into Iraq. There was seen as a general lack of productivity in Washington. It was a stalemate. And if you think about it, both sides in the 2016 election, Democrat and Republican, had a populist candidate. The Republicans had Donald Trump, and the Democrats had Bernie Sanders. Well, yes, he ultimately will not get the nomination from Hillary, but he will have a very strong showing despite being an avowed socialist. So on the one hand, whether you like their message or not, either side, you cannot deny that both Bernie and Trump were the result of populist waves. Again, this is a 21st century populist wave. Second reason, white lash. Now again, this is not the sole cause of his victory, but race will play a very important part. And I'm not talking about the obvious things. Now, on the one hand, yes, the KKK, Graham Poobah, did endorse Donald Trump. For the fact that Donald Trump, one of the first things he did in his campaign was he attacked Mexican immigrants, calling them rapists and murderers. Why does he do this, though? Again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you Donald Trump is a racist. That's for you to decide on your own. I have my own opinions. You can have yours based on education and knowledge. But why does he do this? Well, because it taps into that mainstream America fervor, that fear that Nixon tapped, the Southern strategy that Nixon tapped into, that silent majority. It taps into that movement conservative, that evangelical, that Southern strategy that Reagan tapped into. And it can be traced back to that rise of the Tea Party. They want someone who's going to be a hardliner against the issues that bother them. Not to mention, we're not exactly having the greatest economy. You want someone to blame. It's easy to blame immigrants. But even this, the white lash, the populism, does not fully explain Trump's victory. If you want to understand why Clinton led the popular vote by more than 2 million votes, but still lost, most of those votes can be attributed to the liberal bastion of California. Easy to see it there. She won big in California. But Clinton lost, not because of California. She lost because there is usually a firewall in what's called the Rust Belt. Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin. These old industrial centers that are known as the Rust Belt that have been gutted as a result of NAFTA. These have long been solid Democratic blue states, in large part thanks to the unions, steel unions, auto workers union, etc. And in many ways, the 2016 election was the revenge of the Rust Belt. Why? Well, remember, I'm from Michigan originally. The heart of the Rust Belt, Detroit, Flint, Michigan. Look at these pictures of the Flint, Michigan here. There's the city of Flint, their top left. Look at the vacancies between 2000 and 2010. Almost half the city is 25% or greater in vacancies. Look at the top right. This was an actual picture from a real estate website. Asking price, $12,500 for a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment. That's cheaper than you can get an apartment for here in Houston today. Look at the bottom right. That's a plant, GM plant in Flint, Michigan. The bottom Left is Detroit, Michigan. These are empty plants. Thanks to NAFTA, the giant sucking sound that Ross Perot talked about, it happened. All the jobs went elsewhere, many of them to Mexico, many of them to China. And as a result, these once proud automotive cities or other industrial cities in the Midwest, they had hoped that the change we could believe in of Barack Obama would be a reality. But the reality was, because I know this to be true because I'm from there. Remember, I moved in 2011. For my parents, my brother, things were no better under the 8 years of Obama than they were in the 8 years of George W. Bush. And Hillary Clinton's promising 8 more years of the exact same thing that Obama did. She wanted to be a continuation of Obama's presidency. That doesn't work. Now, I have a clip. Oh, here's some more pictures, by the way, of Detroit for you. Again, how bad things are. Bottom left is how things used to be. The rest of the pictures are how things are now with broken out window buildings. I have this clip I usually like to show in class, and I can't show it because, well, YouTube will give me a copyright strike for it, or at least a copyright mark for it. If you get a chance to watch this clip, just Google it. He talks about the young woman. Here's a white woman in the picture, the bottom left or bottom right of your screen. She talks about how could she vote for Trump, as a woman especially. And her answer was her parents from the Midwest. And her family was no better off. 8 years of Obama. She can't afford 8 more years of a Democrat president with Hillary promising a continuation of Obama. But Donald Trump, as a businessman, promised something different. Maybe something better. Another standpoint, though. So this explains all these reasons contribute to why Donald Trump wins. Also think about, though, the movement conservatives finally get their ultimate wish. They have a businessman leading the country, a businessman who believes that you can go on your own gut, your own feeling, and a small group of individuals, those surrounding Trump, who are loyal to him, they're the ones who have the right to make all the decisions. Now, I'm not going to spend a long time in his presidency. It's too new. We don't have historical distance to fully analyze it. But I do want to mention a couple highlights. And of course, the big one being he will become only the third president in history to be impeached. Again, whether you like or loathe Donald Trump, he will be the third president in history to be impeached. Remember, Nixon was actually not impeached. He resigned first. Of course, he escapes on party lines as the former Clinton impeachment lawyer Alan Dershowitz now argued that even if Trump had done the things he was accused of, even if he didn't actually true, and actually by the end of the trial, they pretty much all kind of said he did do it, that it really was quid pro quo. But even if he did it, it wasn't enough to remove him from office. Essentially arguing the president was above the law, and as long as he's president, he cannot be prosecuted for any crime or indicted. So that begs the question is the president really above the law? It's a good question to ask as we go forward in the next election. And I don't just mean for who you're voting for, but I mean what laws should be passed to protect this. And of course, under Trump, he has appointed 2 very conservative Supreme Court justices. Under Trump's administration, many courts have restricted the access to abortion. He has also simultaneously begun separating migrant families from Latin Americans across the border. And again, this was technically Obama-era policy, but under Trump's zero tolerance, it put kids en masse in cages. Now, currently, of course, we're dealing with the coronavirus, and of course, the jury is still out as far as how Trump has actually dealt with the virus. Did he respond too late to it? Has he sent mixed messages? Or has he done, in his words, a good job? The one thing I will say, this is unequivocal, and I'm glad he finally stopped, but for a long time he was calling it a foreign virus and a quote-unquote Chinese virus. And the result of that was people were having a major backlash against Chinese people, Chinese Americans. People were rapidly avoiding Chinese restaurants in Chinatown sections of the country. There was openly racist hatred being spewed at Chinese Americans across this country. And that is something that should not be done. We should learn from our history. We should not repeat the mistakes of the past. We've already gone through this during World War I with Germans, with World War II and Japanese, even a little bit with the Iraq War with the French. Let's not repeat these mistakes. So what is it going forward? Well, we are the future of democracy. You are the future of democracy. A vast majority of you can vote in this next election. Guys, don't just vote how your parents vote. Get the facts for yourself, read, find out what you believe, and then make the decision that's best for you and for those around you. What's best for America? We have a democratic nation. Let's make sure we keep it that way. The future of democracy is in your hands. This is an awful burden to bear, but an important one if we want to really keep our nation, well, as the true United States of America. I've had a pleasure being with you all this year. I hope you all enjoy this course. And as always, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm always here for you. But until next time, take care and bye-bye.